You really converted water into wine. Your experience with Evian, who really is maybe a benchmark for turning a commodity product into a lifestyle brand. Is there like one headline takeaway that you could share with the wine industry from what you learned with Water Brand?
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing Liquid Death has just done too. It was one of the earlier ones, I think, to do so, but there's no shortage of examples. And that's why I love working across types of beverage because there's so many things to be learned from other segments. I was probably still in junior high when this happened, but when Evian entered the US market, you think of the movie where the guy, they're all out drinking too much. This is the 80s. And he goes to the bar and says, "I'll have an Evian, please." And that was very purposeful. That signals Evian is not a commodity. It is a viable social alternative to drinking alcohol, which, God, back in the 80s, you would have been thought you were crazy if you were at a bar and not drinking alcohol, or else an alcoholic who was recovering. And it created permission. It gave that permission structure. So when I was at Evian, we did a ton of product placement in movies, celebrity driveway drops. We were constantly in the press. We earned a lot of our media. We wanted to make it a strong brand.
Welcome to Masterclass US Wine Market with me, Barbara Fitzgerald. In this show, we'll break down the complexities of selling wine in the US by discussing the relevant issues of today with experts from around the globe. Each episode serves up 3 key insights to help elevate your winery's presence in the US market. So grab a pen and paper and let's pave the way for your success in the US. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Masterclass US Wine Market. Today, I am very excited to welcome Courtney O'Brien to the show. Courtney is the founder of Outlier Initiative, which is a consultancy that focuses on beverage brands, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic. She helps her clients clarify their stories, their positioning, and their go-to-market strategy. She's worked in the beverage industry for 25 years in the US, starting with Danone, working with Evian to launch her career, then moving on Coca-Cola to launch Coke Zero, and then entered the wine industry about 15 years ago with Gallo. So, Courtney, thank you so much for being here with us today and bringing all this amazing experiential knowledge to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And before we dive into today's conversation, can you tell us a little bit more in your own words about your background and how you came to work in wine?
Sure. So I actually got my Master's of Business Administration, my MBA, out in California. So that's the first time I had ever been to California at the Anderson School at UCLA. And I went to work in brand management afterwards. So in marketing with Evian in the United States. Very small operation and outpost they had in the US at the time, not consolidated with their dairy operations. And I learned an incredible amount about marketing and beverage marketing from people that managed to make water a brand, and a brand that was desirable among celebrities and even a call brand in bars. So I got teased a lot that if I can learn to market water, I could learn to market anything. So I got a tremendous foundation there. Evian and Coke did a distribution deal back then. And so many of us interviewed for and relocated to the Coca-Cola headquarters in Atlanta. I continued to work on Evian and then eventually went to work for Coke and got there right at the time of the launch of Coke Zero, which I was privileged to get to lead. So I led that for 3 years. It was an incredible trial by fire. The brand was not super successful right out of the gate in the first month or two it was launched. And so I did a lot of dialing back, tweaking, and then kind of relaunching in a big way and then growing it to 70 million cases by the time I left a couple of years later. But during that time, I had attended some food and wine events, really from Evian, and had discovered that there was a thing called wine marketing. I ran into a wine supplier at one of these events and was given a business card. And I was like, wait a minute, you can do this? You can do what I do, but for wine? And that became my aspiration ever since. So even when I was working at Coke, I was taking my certification exams on the weekend and really aiming to break into the industry, which is easier said than done when you live in Atlanta, which is where I was at the time. But I was really excited about doing so. And then one day I got the call from Gallo, who was recruiting kind of beverage brand builders from outside the industry to give some diversity of thought to their marketing teams. And so I joined the wine industry in 2008 and moved back out to California, to Northern California. And then I did that for 15 years with so many different experiences at Gallo.
Amazing. What a journey. You really converted water into wine.
Seriously. Soda in between, yes.
Thank you again so much for being here because I think there is so much value for our industry to be able to hear from people with broader, both kind of CPG experience, but also Fortune 500, company type of experience. Because, the wine industry, as we know, is a lot of, small, medium enterprises.
Yep.
And so being able to have these like insights from these companies that have highly curated their strategy and how they're measuring it is so helpful for all of us.
Well, I'm glad. I hope I can live up to that.
You will. You will. So, with that said, our 3 key takeaways for this episode and what we're really excited to dive into with you, Courtney, are first, the wine industry underinvests in brand meaning. So, it's kind of over indexed on telling the story of the product, like heritage and terroir, and kind of under indexed on telling the story of the brand from the emotional identity, cultural relevance pieces. Then number 2, we're going to talk about modern consumers and how they connect through values and access and experiences rather than hierarchy. So everyone talks about younger drinkers right now, and they really see wine as a part of a broader lifestyle ecosystem rather than a standalone luxury product. So what does this mean for purchasing behavior? And then number 3, we'll talk about the next era of growth, which I would argue will come from clarity and not complexity. So the US wine market is kind of well saturated with some maybe overlapping some brands and even confusing portfolios in some cases. So we'll talk about why really clear, disciplined positioning is a competitive advantage.
You are speaking my language. Phenomenal takeaways.
All right. Amazing. Amazing. Well, let's dive right into it. So first, kind of going back to that first takeaway of what is brand meaning and why does it matter to be competitive? So from your perspective, why do so many wine brands still lead with the production and provenance pieces instead of brand identity or purpose?
Well, it's funny. It's funny if you think about Coca-Cola doing that. So what if in order to sell this, we just talked about the chemistry that went into the brown liquid and the lab we made it in and how big we made the bubbles? I mean, it's laughable, right? It would be not a very compelling story to people when they're just thirsty. I think that wine is such an interesting artistic beverage that has a lot more to it and a lot more romance. And sometimes we get carried away with our own stories and our own love of the product and the industry. And we forget that the majority of people that drink wine, even on a once in a while basis, do not necessarily share our passion for this as a lifestyle. And they are thirsty, they're looking to party, they're looking to celebrate, and their level of interest may not go down to the depth of wanting to know the grape and where it was born. And if you think of a category that you feel that way about, for example, I often use like shoes as an example. I love shoes, but my level of depth of interest in how my shoe was made and where the leather came from and the cow and the country of origin, like, do not care. Just show me a cute shoe. It's got to be comfortable. It's got to be within my price range, and I'm on to the next thing. And so I think it helps to put yourself in that position from a wine owner or a brand person's point of view, rather than our own point of view, to think about where people are coming from. It's easier to tell the story that's obvious. We think people are going to be as interested in us. But in reality, building a brand with meaning requires you to get inside your consumer's head and not only your own story.
Yeah. I kind of always think of this as your story as the brand and all of these things like, your appellation or whatever is so important to you, but
right.
You're not trying to sell to you. You have to tell things that are important to the customer. Think of them as the main character of the story.
Right.
And everything
100%.
else is like you're the supporting actors.
Yes. And that's exactly how I learned to build brand positioning. I studied the story brand framework by Donald Miller. I'm actually a certified guide. I did that later in my career because I believe so strongly in that consumer-centric framework. But that also doesn't mean you just go chase whatever the trend is today and, what do you want me to be sort of thing. I've done focus groups. I was managing 2 interesting brands at the time, and we were doing consumer research. One was Apothic and one was an Italian Pinot Grigio wine brand. With Apothic, they followed us because people followed us and wanted everything we put out, wanted to be part of our world because of what we stood for. And with this Italian wine brand, we were trying to fix it. And we were asking this incredible focus group of people, what do you find interesting? What do you want us to be? And they didn't want to answer that question. They're like, what do you mean? What do I want you to be? Like, what are you? What's your point of view? Have a point of view. And then I'll follow that if I find it interesting. So it's certainly not just rolling over and asking consumers what you want me to be. It's marrying the two. It's really understanding where your potential consumer is coming from and what their world looks like and their level of interest in this topic and what else they're interested in outside of this. And then deciding how, given you and what you have to work with and your history and your strengths and weaknesses, how can you give yourself meaning that will mean something to them while also being true to yourself?
Yeah, it's like having empathy on both sides, right? You have to be able to kind of relate to where your brand is coming from in order for it to really feel like you can have a powerful relationship with them.
Yes. And that you can do it long term, right?
Yes. So you kind of touched on this a little bit just a moment ago, but that said, a lot of wine brands, especially coming from Italy, are really legacy houses. And so how can kind of a heritage brand evolve their messaging without losing authenticity or alienating their base audience?
Right. Well, I hear that phrase a lot, without alienating their base audience. It's always difficult to actively market to more than one audience at a time, especially with limited funds and time. It takes a lot to really have a dual audience. So I think I would also say, if your base audience is an average age of 65, like a brand that I inherited was, we knew that was not a growth plan for the next couple decades, right? We couldn't let that just continue to be the case. We needed to make this more relevant to more people. But of course, we didn't want to give up that volume either. It involves an even more complex answer, but it builds on what we were just talking about, in my opinion. So you're likely not going to go directly from that 65-year-old to a 25-year-old audience. That's a really big drop without alienating them, because the tactics and the message that you would need to use would be so not what that other audience is used to seeing and believing about you. In the case that I inherited, we went to a 45-year-old target audience. And that really worked quite well for us because the platforms were still somewhat similar. We were still on Facebook. We didn't have to be on TikTok. We went with a very bold message. The one I'm thinking of is Claude Bois and the repositioning with the elderly women campaign that spoke to both constituents. But it's kind of ironic that it was an elderly women campaign. I don't think it needed to be. So first, I would advise that you not try to make such a big jump. I think a lot of wineries get overwhelmed with, okay, now I got to go appeal to Gen Z. You don't have to go appeal to the people that are still in their lower 20s. There's still a lot of other people you could appeal to. And there's many ways to make your message, quote unquote, appealing to those different groups. It's the channels you show up. It's how you talk about it. It's whether your website looks like it's in the modern day and era that they're used to scrolling through on other brands. It's the people you partner with. It's how you speak to them. It's showing up at restaurants that they go to. There's one of them is kind of like your story. And then it's like how you do it and where you show up also tells people a lot about who you're for. And I think that's a big unlock also for broadening your audience.
Yeah, that's such a great call out. There's what you curate in written content, visual content, but there's also just where you are. And that says so much about who you are.
Right. 100%.
I'm going to ask you something a little off topic, but just kind of out of curiosity. With these younger audiences, how important is a website still today? Like, are they going to the website or are they looking at for the brand on social media? And is the website really kind of a resource for the trade now? Like, what do you think about that?
I believe it's your home. As much as we used to have a sign out front in our shop, you have to have a home. I have tried launching a brand before without having a website that was really consumer facing, or done a really tiny little one. We had no money and we prioritized social. That's fine to prioritize one over the other. But without a home, it's almost like, are you really real? Especially in this era of AI, am I looking at something that's truly located somewhere that's actually made by a human that feels like it's a legit thing? I think it does serve that purpose. It can also serve the purpose of being where you purchase it. Doesn't have to be, obviously. And it's your chance to tell your story for people that want to go deeper. That said, I don't think it's your number one thing. Like if I was going to do a QR code on a package, I would not just send them to my homepage, right? Like you don't just say, come on over, come to my home. You kind of meet somebody out at a bar and you're like, just come to my home and we'll just walk in the front door and then just kind of sit there and stare at each other, right? Like what do you want? What experience do you want them to have? and you know that you're already at the bar. Like that's social media essentially, right? Like we're already both out and about talking to other people. We can have fun there also. You don't always have to come to my home. And if you do, you better have a thoughtful kind of plan thought out if you want to woo me into going into a deeper relationship with you. So certainly it's a trade repository. It's also a signal of realness, also in the era of AI, how much of a role does that play in terms of pulling content? But don't expect it to just be like, I put up a flag, so I am here and everyone's going to show up now.
Right, right. You still have to do the work of being hospitable in your digital landscapes.
Yes. And exactly think through what you want them to do when they're there and how much time you want to spend going to them where they are.
Yeah. And I really love this analogy of inviting someone over to your home, because I think most of us in wine have some hospitality genes in us. And it's like you would never invite somebody over to your home and not have a plan for them.
Right.
You would, have dinner made for them or drinks you're going to open or something like that.
Yes, you would think through the music. You would think through,
Exactly.
if you really, I mean, say this was a date or something, if you really wanted the next date, you would think through how you wanted to leave it at the end of the evening. People aren't just going to come to your website once and sign up for your club and be lifelong members. So that's not how building a relationship works.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it wasn't totally off topic, but you did talk about in the beginning your experience with Evian, who really is maybe a benchmark for turning a commodity product into a lifestyle brand. So is there one headline takeaway that you could share with the wine industry from what you learned in that process with Water Brand?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same thing Liquid Death has just done too. I mean, it was one of the earlier ones, I think, to do so, but there's no shortage of examples. And that's why I love working across types of beverage, because there's so many things to be learned from other segments. The insight, which I wasn't there for, who knows when this happened? I was probably still in junior high when this happened. But when Evian entered the US market, you think of the movie where the guy, they're all out drinking too much. This is the 80s. And he goes to the bar and says, I'll have an Evian, please. And that was very purposeful. That signals Evian is not a commodity. It is a viable social alternative to drinking alcohol, which, God, back in the 80s, you would have been thought you were crazy if you were at a bar and not drinking alcohol, or else an alcoholic who was recovering. And it created permission. It gave that permission structure. So when I was at Evian, we did a ton of product placement in movies, celebrity driveway drops. We were constantly in the press. So we earned a lot of our media. And that's why we wanted to do it. We wanted to make it a strong brand. And then you see the opposite when the US started to launch a lot of bottled water brands like Dasani and Aquafina, and the 24 packs became $4.99, and a lot of the profit was driven out of it. And now the plastic's so thin, you can barely even squeeze it without overflowing it. And the capsule is a millimeter tall, and it's just done the opposite, right? We've driven so much of the profit out of the bottled water industry, and there's few brands anymore in it. There certainly are some.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's shift a little bit now to talk about our second takeaway and talking about how brand values are really shaping purchasing behavior, especially when we're back to the younger consumers, which is like on everyone's mind, but not just younger consumers, also non-traditional consumers, maybe. What are the biggest shifts they discover and engage with their beverage brands that you've seen?
Yeah, I think, and some of it's just shifts we've seen in society, and they happen to be the young people right now in society. But I think that many of us expect more from our beverages now than just, you're going to quench my thirst. An ante for beverage has always been taste good, right? And be the temperature that I want in that moment. Like you have to be cold if you're going after refreshment, for instance. But now, obviously, it started with do no harm. Okay, so now you've got Gatorade, for instance, which is positioned as the ultimate thirst quencher for elite athletes. And then you start to get smarter once you know you can't unknow. And then you realize what you're giving your kids. And then there's the obesity epidemic and all sorts of artificial dyes. And then you're like, I want to have higher standards than this. So now it's kind of like the do no harm. So it's delicious, it's refreshing, it's available where I want it. Now it's like, is it going to kill me? If it's alcohol, it's already going to be an indulgence, but is it going to totally blow everything I've done all week? Or is it going to be kind of neutral? Right? Can I live with it? Is it not going to hurt me that much? And so I think there's degrees of indulgence. You might go after, you might think it's worth it to get like this delicious, full ingredient, full fat brownie, but like you may not go for like the little Debbie snack cake in the supermarket anymore, because it may just be like, that one has a lot of crap in it. I know I'm going to like really indulge in the real thing. So I think that it's the do no harm. And then it's the, now we're seeing I expect even more from this. I expect proactive health benefits from my beverages. So not only don't kill me, but help me focus more, help me fall asleep, help me digest the Big Mac I just ate. So now it's the race to see how much positive health benefits we can put into it, almost to the detriment of making sense, right? Like, do we really need protein in everything? Do we really need everything to do everything? And now you're seeing the overlap. So I think that we can, young people too, I think even more emphasized extent what I just said, because they're still in kind of really the habit forming foundational years, but that's kind of the drinks demands we're seeing as a society in general.
And what do you think about, should wine brands be positioning themselves as an option of moderation in this landscape of indulgent choices?
I think that is that is probably like the on the nose question that we're all wanting to debate, right? So let me think through how I put my point of view on this one. I think many things. I think that wine is the OG natural beverage, right? Like it's not made for the most part in a factory out of chemicals. Like it comes from the ground and the earth. So it's definitely got trends on its side in that way, in the way that it would even be allowed into like a Whole Foods, for instance, right? With reputable ingredients. So it's got kind of that whole food halo already. When it comes to kind of the next step of do no harm, I think as people learn more, they're just starting to hear stuff, from the media about, wait a minute, is this doing harm? I don't know. Now I'm unsure. So I think that I believe, a need to address that personally, because I don't like letting any message get away from me without having a stance on how I'm going to address it. And some are, and there's more and more conversation about this. And some conferences upcoming are going to have some really big names talking about this very publicly. And then there's do we actually put something healthful in it, which is, in the US anyway, been kind of something we don't touch because we don't want to position this as a health food. Lowering calories is a way that you can do that through lowering alcohol. That's certainly one attempt at it. There's even a wine I saw in Brazil that's got protein added now. So some people are doing it. But yeah, I think it plays by some of the same rules and has to really think about its approach to the societal expectation around beverage, because it is a beverage.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that answer. And then also still communicating your values takeaway. It seems a little bit like things like sustainability really now are table stakes. So if you're not doing it, what are you waiting for? But also, how can a brand be communicating this without seeming like performative or forced?
Right. I think sustainability as an example still remains very broadly defined. I was asked to do an analysis not long ago from a super premium, ultra premium, $20, $25 range brand up in Napa, who said, is it really an do I have to go organic, for instance? Look at my shelf competitors, look at my neighbors physically, look at the consumer needs and what else they're buying. Do I just perceive it that it's imperative, or how imperative is it really? And my analysis showed that it was not as imperative as I thought going into this assignment. Some are doing it and really hanging their hats on it. And again, you have to know your own story and positioning to know if anything like this that comes up is right for you or not. I believe that there is a level for a lot of people's target consumer. There is a level of expectation they have about not doing a burned earth approach and actively, destroying the earth. And if they were to find out that their brand did, they would opt out. There is a consumer, I believe, and it depends on who your target consumer is and your product, that does not care. Never going to look that far into it. And, it's about party. It's about high energy. It's just not on the top of their mind, especially when they're drinking an indulgence beverage. So I very much think it goes back to who you're trying to appeal to and what your story is, the level of something like sustainability that you need to make sure that you can look yourself in the mirror with and play back to your consumer, and that's going to go well with them.
Yeah, honestly and authentically. It sounds like the answer to many of these questions are know your consumer.
That is absolutely the way I feel. Yes, because I mean, look at a brand like Beatbox. It's technically
Yeah.
wine. Do you really think that you have to be producing that sustainably or everyone's going to stop buying it? No,
Yeah.
because it's not the same consumer. And that's an extreme example that doesn't even really go to market acting like a wine, but there are many commercial examples of people. I mean, do you think the barefoot user really cares that deeply? Maybe it's a core value of theirs, but alcohol for a long time has gotten a pass at really being looked at that thoroughly versus like the foods that these people might buy. So honestly, I don't think it's an anti yet, but it very much depends on who you are and who you're trying to appeal to.
And do you think that you said alcohol's gotten a pass for a long time on being transparent, but there is a rising demand for this transparency, but do you still think that's pretty niche? Do you think even if it is niche, we're trending in that direction, so you should have a plan for that? Or you think there's always just going to be a large swath of people who just want to have a good time?
Yeah, I think many things that you said are correct at the same time. When I said alcohol's gotten a pass for a long time, that really was an observation that I had long before the word transparent even entered the conversation. You know, we would go on research and go shopping with consumers on shop-alongs, and they would take us to their favorite stores and they'd show us what they purchased and why. And then they would get to the wine department and everything they just said went out the window. They're like, oh, I like this. I like this one. I'm like, well, you just said you only buy organic. Do you only buy organic when it comes to wine too? Well, no, I don't even think they make organic wine. Or if they do, it's like one or two over there. Like I wouldn't even know where to buy that. And then some of them kind of hear themselves talking and they'll be like, you know, that's interesting. I really do kind of give wine a pass. Like I don't think about it in the same way. So that's kind of what I meant. Just from a consumer standpoint, they've had their indulgences kind of put to the side versus 80% of their life, right? What they eat and drink 80% of the time. I do think at the same time that with the better for you movement across everything we eat and drink, we are being bombarded with a level of transparency that we've never seen before. You know, I just went to an olive oil website and I can read every single thing about every olive that ever went into that bottle. Like that wouldn't have happened 10, 15 years ago. And so it's just more normal to us now. I mean, fast food menus have the calories on them. It's more normal to us. And so we're kind of seeing where that doesn't happen in some cases. I certainly don't think it's incredibly widespread yet. And I definitely think that there will always remain a consumer for whom they do not care. That is not their focus. If I'm going to have fun on a Friday, I'm going to have fun on a Friday and I'm not going to overthink it. But it is becoming, I think, in a more macro way, just something we all live with more and think of as more normal. And when it's not there, it does kind of ping oh yeah, why don't we ever talk about that? You know, especially as you've got a big proportion of the country now on GLP-1s. A lot of those users have not maybe been the traditional better for you consumer. And now they're being told they really have to start tracking things. It's really hard to find out the information about your bottle of wine that you're pouring. And so just these things where people start to notice it, I think is kind of like the slightly bubbling up question marks, but I don't think it's widespread yet if you really look at the whole population.
Yeah. And do you think it's like a good strategy for building that trust, that, you know, brand relationship that we've been talking about? Or again, is the answer know your consumer?
Well, I think it's know your consumer because you would think that you can't hurt either way, right? You would think that that would be
Right.
the answer, but it can hurt because I very much believe that anything that doesn't contribute to your story detracts from your story. So say I was managing 19 Crimes, right? Like a brand that's got a lot of interesting things going on. They've got a Halloween label out right now. They've got virtual reality. If I was to also say, oh, and by the way, it's produced sustainably and now we've got an organic line, I don't know. I mean, it just would confuse me, I think, as a consumer. Like, what do you stand for? What do I say to people? So, and you just don't have enough bandwidth in the day to say all those messages in a simple, clear way, going back to your very first point. So I really think it depends, but it can certainly deepen trust, as we've seen across all of CPG, by being very transparent. It's one tactic you can use by being very transparent. However, I would caution that it's easy to be transparent and misleading at the same time. You know, some of our favorite brands that we know, they may say, okay, here's the harvest date. I'm not even talking about wine. Here's the harvest date. pressed fresh, blah, blah, blah. Sounds transparent. And then you find out they actually buy it in bulk from whatever low cost producer, right? Like, and then you get all these like really serious producers that are like, oh, that stuff's crap. They're coming across as being transparent. So I think there's a lot of that going on too that kind of muddies
Yeah.
the waters.
I think you see that a lot in the fashion industry where things will say like made in the US, for example, but really it's like they made 90% of it somewhere else and they attach the zipper in the US.
Right. And I mean, going back to, I kind of skipped over this, but going back to the values we see emerging among Gen Z, you can't help but be, if you get a few examples of this, be distrustful of so many
Yeah.
industries. I think that kind of contributes to why I attach myself so much to the person now instead of this faceless company, right? Like it's easier to build trust as a person than it is as a large company with a brand.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We went down that road for a while. So thank you for all your insights on that. But I have kind of one more question in this takeaway category. So, traditionally, I shouldn't say traditionally, but definitely coming off like, the 90s, early 2000s, where aspiration was really framed through exclusivity. I mean, is that still resonating today, or does aspiration really, has it been redefined?
I have this conversation with wine brands all the time because so many, especially people that came of age maybe during that time where aspiration was exclusive, which means you were excluding people on purpose. You had to want to be part of the cool club. You kind of had to work at it and you were really gratified once you got there. And then kind of as human nature kind of makes you want to turn around and exclude other people, make them want to go through the same thing that you did. Like think about rushing a sorority, for instance. I think that the world has evolved a little bit since then. And I don't think that Gen Z has quite that same level of you got to earn it and I got to feel bad for not meeting your standard and then beg you to let me in. It's just not as on trend anymore, I wouldn't say. And when you do see it, like I went to a winery in Texas, actually. I was in Texas Hill Country. And I went to, for the most part, very welcoming tasting rooms, underpriced and under visible wines that were so good. But there was this one winery that just stood out like a sore thumb. You felt like you were on the set of Dallas in the 80s that like just had this attitude. Like you couldn't even sit down. There was like nowhere to sit down except for in the reserved paid sections that you had to be a member. And so everywhere you turned, you couldn't have a good experience unless you were a member. And we were with people that were members and we were inside those ropes. And I remember looking at those poor people who just wanted to sit down and thinking poorly of the winery, even though I was in already. It's just not as acceptable, I don't think, today. So I do think we still look at our luxury brands and we still want them because we can't afford them and people we admire are using them or wearing them in some way. But I believe that you can still charge a lot for things and build things that are covetable without this air of exclusion. And I think that that's much more where we're going, especially with Gen Z.
Yeah. They're a very inclusive generation.
Yeah, it's not cool to be exclusive.
Yeah. And I am not Gen Z. I am 40 years old, but even I don't want to exclude anybody on
I
purpose.
know.
Like,
It feels yucky. Yes.
let's invite everyone and they can decide if they don't want to come.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's shift now to our third takeaway. So, talking about what the brand stands for, who it's for, and how it shows up across channels matter. And you kind of already brought this up a little bit previously, but when you're looking at a brand that's struggling, kind of how do you diagnose if it's suffering from too much versus too little in terms of all of these, communicating these values or having these values to begin with?
In terms of having the values.
Like even them knowing their brand identity.
That's the first thing I start with. I have been given so many struggling brands over my career, and have also invented them from nothing. But the first thing you have to do, even if the brand is 50 years old, unless they already do, you have to get in there and very clearly understand the world in which they are operating. I always start with the world and not with that brand. So I look, for instance, at the competitive set through the eyes And this is kind of before I get deep into the consumer work, but still through the eyes of those that would ever consider buying them, or their current consumer, or whoever they have data on, what else are they considering? What else are they buying outside your category? What's going on in the world? What are you interacting with? What are the trends in your category? Who's winning and who's not? And what can we learn from that? Okay, now let's look at your brand. In light of that, what do you have going for you that the others don't? Is that something that consumers care about? Who thinks that you have that going for you? What are some of your things that are holding you back? Everybody has them. Like, I can't do that. I'm 50 years old. I'm never going to be the best at TikTok, for instance. Like, I'm just never going to be that. So like we can put myself over here as these are what I have to work with, and these are what I don't authentically have to work with in a sustainable way forever. Right? This is not like, could I force myself to, or could I hire somebody that's good at it and maybe like let them do it for a year, but I never really learned it. So it's not real replicable. And then you put them together and say, where can I go with this sandwich of where I can fit in, what's going on in culture and trends, and what I have to work with? Where are the places I could go, and who might I appeal to? Who has a problem that I could solve? And that's how I choose the consumer. That's how I really dial in on the tight version of the consumer, that if you're a family-owned company, your values are extremely enduring, most likely. They're not going anywhere. They are part of your family as much as they are the corporation, and you have to be authentic to them. So who would those resonate with? Forcing them on somebody or just going after everyone is the road to spending a lot of money and being frustrated. So that's always how I start a diagnosis, to figure out what they're doing, quote unquote, right, and what they're doing, quote unquote, wrong, and whether they have too much or too little of anything. It's within that framework that has to be answered.
And so adding on to what you just said, and kind of calling back to the famous answer, you have to know who your customer is. Here in the US, our wine brands in the US have the benefit of often having a DTC channel to build their consumer insights. So thinking from now, like the Italian perspective, for example, where getting this customer consumer information is a lot more challenging. It's more siloed between distribution and producer. What is a way that a wine company can really learn who their true target consumer is?
Yeah. And it's more of an art than it is a science, no matter how much data you have.
Yeah.
I'm training a session on this next week at an actually really quite large winery. And I'm even training them on how to think really scrappy about it, because with the online access we have now, there's nothing stopping you. So many of what I'm going to say tactics are free. They're just work. So I think clearly, if you have existing customer information, look at it. That doesn't mean that you have to only target them, for sure. Who are they? What are they saying that they like about you? What are they asking for? And is this a good sign or a bad sign? Then, you really have to do that work that I mentioned about what you have to work with and where you fit in your quote unquote competitive set. Really, really honestly. Then think, who might that resonate with? Then you start testing that. Reddit is your friend. Okay. Facebook comments, forums, groups, the internet is your friend. And so are IRL gatherings, like stores. People standing in front of shelves are your friends. Liquor store operators can tell you a lot about who's buying certain things and the things that people are asking for. Studying culture is your friend. You can learn a lot about just different types of consumers that are out there. Everyone is not a special snowflake, right? You can group people into interesting groups. I work across categories all the time. I have to go in and figure out who the olive oil consumer is in 6 segments. You can do it for sure, but you have to pay attention to culture in the country that you're trying to sell in. Who is buying what? And then what you have to work with determines who you go after. Then you get deep into Reddit. What do people complain about? What do they have trouble with? What are they talking about other topics? And they all kind of go together. And when you know it, you will have like this diamond that will just excite you. Yes.
Yeah. I actually was just listening to an interview with Britt West from
Yes.
Barefoot. And he was talking about how, Barefoot, number one selling brand by volume in the US. And he was talking about how they read the Facebook comments and how that helps them develop strategy for the future. And so it's like you've got this landmine that we love our hard number metrics in the wine industry. And I think sometimes qualitative data gets a little bit of a bad rap.
That's interesting. Yes. I mean, you'd be a fool not to take advantage of any feedback that you have. And I always took it very seriously, especially, if we launched something new, I'd be like frantically obsessing over any Facebook comments or anything to determine temperature read. And it's funny, sometimes you see a different narrative. If you do have data, you see a different narrative being told in a boardroom, like, oh, this was super successful. We didn't lose any consumers over it, even though we thought we might, whatever. And then you look at that brand's Instagram and you're like, people are furious. Like, even if you need to acknowledge it, at least. It might be 1% of people that are furious, but you need to know about it and know how to put that in your brain. Is that something you can tolerate?
And I think harkens back to what you said before, that the minute you lose control of your message, a lot goes out the window. And if even 1% of your former consumer base is livid with you, you're losing control of your message.
Right. 100%. 100%.
So I could talk to you all day, but I will be respectful of your time. We talked a little bit about really how important it is to be clear and direct. So what is kind of one common branding mistake that really erodes clarity in the wine category, and what's the fix? How can brands correct it?
I have the one that I'm going to say, which is not being decisive. Not being decisive, I think, is the biggest problem that every brand out there has, except for the ones that you really like, probably because they're being decisive. And even if it's not for you, you respect them for it and you kind of chuckle. It's very insider. This industry tends to go to market in a very insider way, like we're all marketing for each other. We assume that people know to turn to the back label if they want to see more. We assume people don't expect to see calories. We assume that they know what the red mountains are and care. We assume they're going to get close on shelf and really look at our label. We assume we're going to be eye height on shelf. We assume they know what the heck Merlot tastes like, and we don't need to tell them. And none of these are common things to assume in most other industries. So I think that maybe, depending on who your consumer is, they would be offended by being explained what Merlot was, right? But if your consumer is a brand new wine consumer and you're complaining you can't get Gen Z to drink wine, think about all the things that don't exist out there for all different types of people in the wine category versus the things that we have 50 of, all doing the same thing in the wine category. When I look for design examples and I look for clarity of message examples, and I do this for wine brands, I struggle to find wine brand examples. It's usually outside the category that I can find examples of. And it's a real stretch to find examples within the category that are on trend for design trends, that are using the font that Gen Z is used to seeing elsewhere, that are talking to them, that are on the platforms that they're on in an authentic way. And then we wonder, right? And I think it's because we have not decided tightly enough who our must-have ride or die drinker is and who we are going to be all about. We're trying to play it too safe and get everybody.
Yeah. I think maybe that is also the downside to the fact that most of us have hospitality genes, is like, we're like, there's room for everyone at the table. But, you can't build a strategy. You can't sell everything to everyone.
Right.
So,
right. You will dilute your message. That's for sure.
Yeah. Oh, Courtney, this has been amazing. So many wonderful insights. I mean, I really think the key takeaway should have been, you have to know who your customer is.
Or make a choice. If you don't know, pick something, try it, right? And try being specific. And the funny thing about being specific is other people will self-opt in also, that you don't even think you're talking to.
Yeah, definitely. Because people are looking for products to be part of their lives in a specific way. Like, it's rare that somebody needs a product to fill a broad range of things.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And if they do, they will invite you to expand your relationship with them, not like right away, right?
Right.
Like I was just reading an article about Patagonia, iconic clothing brand that we all know stands for a lot more than clothing, but they've got this provisions division and they launched a non-alc beer. And it looks like the label on your jacket. That's what the beer can looks like. And I was staring at it. I'm like, I don't want to be the person that thinks this, but I am the person that thinks this. I don't think I would drink that. I don't need a beer by Patagonia. Like, I really like what they stand for, and I would absolutely pay more for their jackets than something next to it without that label on it. But I'm just not looking for that depth of a relationship when it comes to something refreshing. It doesn't have that carryover for me. So yes, they're looking to fit you into their existing lives while going to the grocery store, dropping off their kids, and worrying about Halloween costumes, right? Like, they're not looking to marry you.
Yeah, that's a great call out. Okay, so we wrap up our show here, Masterclass US Wine Market, with a rapid fire quiz where we ask our guests 3 questions to help our listeners really better understand this episode and the US market. So just try to answer in a couple, headline statements if you can. Number 1, what is your number 1 tip for positioning a wine brand in the US?
Be specific. Say something specific to somebody specific.
I love that. We just kind of covered that in depth. Okay, number 2, what is something you would have told your younger professional self about working in the wine industry?
It's going to be a lot harder to move this cruise ship than you think it is.
Yes. Historically slow to change industry, but there's a lot to love about it too.
Start one brand at a time.
Yeah. Okay. And number 3, we move around a lot in this industry. You just told me you're got like a 3-hour drive ahead of you next week. So what is your favorite travel hack when you're on the road? Just something really practical.
As it relates to the wine industry or just myself?
Just in life, like, a great podcast you need to listen to. Or
yes. I have too many podcasts that I listen to. I can't even keep up. But one thing that does relate to the wine industry that I also always do, I combine this with personal needs to go to the bathroom and all that as I'm traveling. I always pop into unexpected shops. I love liquor stores, convenience stores because of my Coke days, which are now selling more and more kind of crossover beverages. And I've been trained, and you can't untrain this from me, to always ask the shopkeeper what he's selling a lot of, what people are asking for, what he needs more of. And you remain up to date that way versus cramming to do that when you're trying to, save a brand, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's back to that, what we talked about before, the importance of qualitative research on top of your numbers.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, Courtney, thank you again so much. You've been so generous with your time and your insights. Can you let our listeners know how they can connect with you?
Yes, sure. I am all over LinkedIn. You can find me LinkedIn at Courtney O'Brien, no apostrophe, just like that. And also my website is theoutlierinitiative.com.
Amazing. And I can say you're one of my favorite people to follow on LinkedIn. You have the most insightful, just digestible tidbits of information to get your creativity and strategic brain going. So
thank you. I really enjoy the platform and interacting with people there.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And maybe I'll see you someday soon in Sonoma County.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Courtney. And that's a wrap for this episode of Masterclass US Wine Market. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date with the latest industry trends, remember to like, follow, and share our podcast. And if you find value in our conversations, please leave us a review to help others discover the show and grow our community. Stay tuned for new episodes every Monday. Until then, brindiamo il vostro successo.